I learned early that love was a currency my mother traded conditionally. Each affection came with an invisible price tag, each moment of tenderness a calculated transaction. My earliest memories are a kaleidoscope of carefully constructed performances. Her perfect suburban housewife facade meticulously maintained, her true self a sharp-edged instrument of psychological manipulation. By age 7, I understood silence. Not the peaceful quiet of contentment, but the suffocating silence of walking on invisible eggshells. A misplaced toy, a slightly wrinkled homework page, even a momentary expression of spontaneous childhood joy could trigger her cold, surgical dismantling of my self-worth. "You're a disappointment," she would say, her voice a razor wrapped in silk. "No one will ever love someone as imperfect as you." These weren't just words. They were architectural plans for my future, blueprints of insecurity she was meticulously constructing. Each criticism was a brick, each dismissive glance a layer of mortar, building walls around my potential, my dreams, my very sense of self. In school, I became invisible, not by choice, but by training. Years of her psychological conditioning had taught me that visibility meant vulnerability. I watched other children laugh, play, make mistakes, freedoms I couldn't comprehend. My world was a tightly controlled experiment, and she was the ruthless scientist. My father was a ghost, present yet absent. A successful lawyer who traveled constantly, he seemed more comfortable negotiating complex legal battles than addressing the emotional warfare happening within our home. When home, he'd offer perfunctory affection, a quick kiss, a distracted, "How are you?" before retreating into his study, leaving me with her. As I entered adolescence, her tactics evolved. No longer physical proximity, her control became more sophisticated. She'd strategically undermine my friendships, hint at my social inadequacies, compare me unfavorably to more successful children. Each conversation was a minefield, each interaction a potential trigger for her calculated emotional demolition. I learned to anticipate her moods like a meteorologist predicts storms. The slight narrowing of her eyes, the precise angle of her pursed lips, these were my early warning systems. Survival meant reading her emotional topography with scientific precision. But beneath the carefully maintained exterior, a different version of myself was quietly taking shape. Watching, learning, waiting. The revelation came on a Tuesday, not dramatically like in movies, but with the clinical precision that defined my mother's existence. I was sorting through my deceased grandmother's old papers, the only relative who had ever shown me genuine kindness, when the first document caught my eye. A birth certificate. Not mine. My hands trembled, fingers tracing the faded ink. The name listed as my mother wasn't her real name. The details didn't align. Something fundamental was wrong. 3 hours of meticulous research later, the truth unfolded like a toxic flower. I wasn't her biological child. I was a carefully selected project, adopted through a series of manipulated legal channels, chosen specifically to be molded, controlled, broken. My entire existence had been a calculated performance. The adoption papers revealed a chilling narrative. My biological parents had been young, struggling, but deeply in love. My mother, the woman I knew, had connections. Powerful friends in legal circles. She'd orchestrated an under-the-table adoption, fabricating documents, silencing potential witnesses. I remembered every moment of psychological torture, every calculated critique. Now I understood why. I wasn't a child to her. I was an experiment. A blank canvas she could reshape according to her most twisted designs. The perfect victim, meticulously selected and groomed. My father, the man I'd thought was my biological parent, knew. His distant demeanor, his calculated silences, suddenly made grotesque sense. He was complicit, a willing participant in this decades-long psychological experiment. The emotional breakdown wasn't immediate. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity descended. Years of manipulation suddenly made sense. The constant comparisons, the surgical precision of her emotional abuse, all of it stemmed from the fact that I was never truly her child in any meaningful sense. I called her that evening, my voice steady, calm, controlled. "We need to talk," I said. Her response was typical, a practiced laugh. "About what, darling?" In that moment, I knew. The game was about to change, dramatically. Revenge is an architecture of precision. I approached my plan like the scientific experiment she had treated me as, methodical, calculated, without a single emotional tremor. First, intelligence gathering. My professional background as a forensic data analyst proved unexpectedly useful. I began dismantling her life the way she had dismantled mine, piece by calculated piece. Her reputation as a prominent local philanthropist became my primary target. Years of volunteer work, board memberships, social connections, all carefully constructed, would become my weapons. I compiled everything: financial records, correspondence, hidden communications. The first breakthrough came through her professional network. My mother, Elizabeth Hardwick, respected community leader, had a pristine public image. Beneath that surface, I discovered a web of manipulations: charitable donations with questionable origins, recommendations that seemed legitimate but concealed darker motivations. I contacted old colleagues, former employees, people she had helped over the years, not with anger, but with clinical precision. Each conversation was a surgical instrument, extracting precise information. I listened, documented, analyzed. Her legal firm, where my father was a senior partner, became my next investigation point: hidden settlements, buried conflicts of interest, professional misconduct carefully masked behind expensive suits and polished presentations. Technology became my ally: advanced data recovery techniques, cross-referencing digital footprints, creating a comprehensive profile that would deconstruct her meticulously maintained facade. I discovered patterns, not just in her professional life, but in her personal relationships. A trail of manipulated connections, people she had used, then discarded, relationships strategically maintained for social capital. My approach wasn't about destruction, it was about exposure, revealing the intricate machinery of manipulation she had constructed over decades. Each piece of evidence was a carefully placed domino, waiting for the perfect moment to fall. I created multiple contingency plans: digital archives, encrypted files, backup strategies. Nothing would be left to chance. The same way she had never left anything about my upbringing to chance. On my 35th birthday, exactly 20 years after she had told me I was nothing, would be nothing, I was ready. The plan was complete. My mother would finally understand what true psychological precision felt like. The game was about to begin, and I would win. The first strike was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone without my carefully cultivated precision. I began with her professional reputation, the armor she'd constructed over decades. The local women's charity board received an anonymous dossier, meticulously documented financial irregularities, subtle manipulations of donation records, evidence of misappropriated funds disguised as administrative costs. Within weeks, whispers started, soft at first, then louder. Her colleagues, those same people who had praised her so effusively, began to distance themselves. Invitations dried up. Board meetings became increasingly tense. I watched from a calculated distance, each movement as deliberate as a chess grandmaster. The legal firm where my father worked became my next target. I anonymously forwarded evidence of long-concealed conflicts of interest to the State Bar Association. Nothing overtly criminal, just enough ethical ambiguity to trigger a comprehensive investigation. My father's professional reputation began to crumble. Late-night emergency meetings, hushed conversations, the kind of professional panic I had witnessed so many times during my childhood, only now directed at him. Elizabeth's social circle was a carefully maintained ecosystem. I systematically introduced doubt. Anonymous emails, strategically leaked information, small, precise cuts that would bleed her social standing slowly, painfully. Her annual birthday gala, a highlight of the local social calendar, became my primary psychological battlefield. I ensured key influential people received carefully curated information about her past manipulations. Nothing they could immediately trace, but enough to create doubt. The first public crack appeared during a charity fundraiser. A prominent donor suddenly withdrew support. Then another. The whispers grew louder. Her carefully constructed facade began to show microscopic fissures. I didn't just want to destroy her. I wanted her to feel the same sense of systematic dismantling she had inflicted on me throughout my childhood. Each revelation was a surgical strike, designed to maximize psychological impact. Her response was predictable: denial, aggression. The same tactics she had used against me for years. But this time, the ground was shifting beneath her feet. I intercepted her communications, monitored her movements. Each of her attempts to control the narrative was anticipated, countered. The psychological warfare I had endured my entire life had become my most potent weapon. By the time winter arrived, Elizabeth Hardwick was no longer the untouchable community leader she had been. Her network was fracturing, her influence was diminishing, and I was just getting started. The most beautiful part? She knew someone was systematically dismantling her life, but she couldn't prove it was me. Precision, patience, psychological warfare, lessons she had taught me too well. The direct confrontation happened on her 65th birthday, a day she had always treated as her personal coronation, an annual celebration of her perceived perfection. I arrived at her meticulously maintained suburban home precisely at 2:17 p.m., the same time of day she would critique my childhood shortcomings. Symmetry was important. "Hello, Mother," I said, standing in the doorway. Her living room, a museum of carefully curated achievements and manipulated memories, seemed to shrink around her. Elizabeth's eyes were different. No longer the calculating instruments of psychological warfare I remembered. Now they were the eyes of someone realizing their intricate control was unraveling. "What have you done?" she asked, not as a question of maternal concern, but as a tactical inquiry. I smiled, the same controlled smile she had taught me during years of performative social interactions. "I've simply applied the lessons you taught me," I responded. Precision, strategic thinking, the art of systematic deconstruction. Her professional network was in chaos. The charity board had launched a full investigation. My father's law firm was under scrutiny for ethical violations. Her social standing, once an impenetrable fortress, now resembled a house of cards in a hurricane. "You don't understand the complexity," she started, reverting to her classic manipulation technique. "The choices we made were calculated," I interrupted, "exactly like how you calculated every moment of my childhood." The revelation about my adoption had changed everything. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a strategist, her ultimate creation. She attempted to redirect, to minimize, to control. Classic Elizabeth Hardwick tactics. But I had learned from the master. "The adoption wasn't just a transaction," I continued. "It was a project. I was your experiment in psychological manipulation." Her composure cracked, just for a moment. But in that moment, I saw everything. The fear, the recognition, the understanding that her most perfectly constructed mechanism was now turning against her. "You can't destroy everything I've built," she said, a slight tremor in her voice. "Can't I?" I responded. The next phase of my plan was already in motion. Anonymous tips to investigative journalists, carefully curated evidence of her decades-long manipulations, not just professional misconduct, but a systematic pattern of psychological abuse. I had become her worst nightmare, the perfect weapon, engineered by her own hands. My father would be collateral damage. He had been complicit, after all. Knowing about the adoption, allowing the psychological torture. His silence was consent. "I'm going to dismantle everything," I said quietly, not out of anger, but with the same clinical precision you used to construct my childhood. For the first time in my life, Elizabeth Hardwick looked truly afraid. The game was no longer theoretical. The psychological warfare had become very, very real. The final unraveling began with a single encrypted file. I had discovered something far more profound than the adoption records. Something that would destroy not just her reputation, but her entire constructed identity. My biological mother, the woman Elizabeth had systematically erased, was alive. More importantly, she had been searching for me for decades. The file contained a network of communications, suppressed court documents, intercepted legal correspondence, a web of manipulation so intricate it made Elizabeth's previous machinations look like amateur attempts. She had not just adopted me, she had deliberately separated me from my biological family. A calculated decision made decades ago, rooted in a complex web of personal vendettas and professional rivalries. My biological mother had been a promising journalist, investigating a major corporate scandal that would have exposed significant corruption. Elizabeth's family, deeply connected in local political and business circles, had systematically destroyed her career, removed her credibility, ensured her professional death. And I was the ultimate trophy in that destruction. When I presented the evidence, Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure shattered. Not dramatically, but with the precise crack of a perfectly constructed glass sculpture falling to the ground. "You don't understand the complexity," she whispered. "I understand perfectly," I responded. "You created me as a weapon without realizing I would eventually turn against you." The implications were devastating, not just for her, but for the entire network of power she had constructed. Local politicians, business leaders, legal professionals, all connected through a decades-long system of manipulation. I had become the ultimate instrument of her destruction. My biological mother arrived unexpectedly during our confrontation. A woman in her 60s, with eyes that matched mine. The genetic connection was undeniable. "I've been looking for you," she said simply. Elizabeth's world collapsed in that moment. Not through violence, not through dramatic revelation, but through the quiet, systematic dismantling of everything she had constructed. The legal implications were just beginning. The adoption had been illegal. The suppression of my biological mother's rights was a federal offense. The corporate and political connections she had maintained would now be scrutinized. "You thought you could control everything," I told Elizabeth, "but you created the very instrument of your destruction." My biological mother placed her hand on mine, a connection decades in the making. Elizabeth Hardwick, the woman who had defined my entire childhood through psychological manipulation, was about to lose everything: her reputation, her social standing, her carefully constructed illusion of control, and I would watch, methodically, precisely. The weapon she had created was finally unleashed. The final act of my revenge was not destruction, it was exposure, complete and total. In the aftermath, silence became my most profound language. Elizabeth Hardwick disappeared from public life, not through dramatic exile, but through the quiet, systematic dismantling of everything she had constructed. Legal investigations, professional disgrace, social isolation. My biological mother, Maria Rodriguez, became the unexpected healing presence I never knew I needed. Not a savior, not trying to replace the past, but a connection that finally made sense of the fragmented pieces of my identity. We didn't rebuild a traditional relationship. Instead, we constructed something new, honest, unencumbered by the manipulation that had defined my childhood. The legal proceedings took months. Each court appearance was another layer of Elizabeth's constructed world peeling away. My father, complicit in years of psychological manipulation, retired in disgrace. His law firm collapsed under the weight of investigations. I didn't feel triumph. I felt liberation. Therapy helped me understand that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reclaiming my narrative. Understanding that the weapon Elizabeth had created, me, was ultimately a survivor, not a victim. Maria shared stories of my early childhood, the love that had been stolen, the connections deliberately severed. Each revelation was a piece of myself I had never known existed. "You were always wanted," she told me, "always loved." Those words held more power than any act of revenge. My professional life transformed. I shifted from forensic data analysis to working with organizations that supported adoptees, helping others navigate the complex psychological landscapes of discovered identities. Elizabeth never contacted me again. Her world had become as small and controlled as the psychological prison she had created for me. The most significant revenge was simple. I became happy, fulfilled, connected to my true self. On the anniversary of the day I discovered the truth, I visited my grandmother's grave, the only person who had shown me genuine love during my childhood. "I'm free," I whispered. And for the first time, I truly was.